gas tanks in UFC history. Imagine training for 3 months in preparation for a fight only to get exhausted in a few minutes when the fight actually happens. Well, that's the story of a few UFC fighters who throughout their careers have given up not because of their opponents, but because there was no gas left in the tank. Here are the top 8 fighters with the weakest cardio endurance in the UFC. Number 8. Francis Ngannou. Heavyweight fighters on average have the worst gas tanks than fighters from other divisions, and there is no better example of this than Francis Ngannou, who eventually went on to become the UFC champion and even defended his belt. But in Francis's case, he packed so much muscle mass that didn't work in his favor at times. Well, with muscle came power never seen before in MMA, but whenever Ngannou fails to finish his opponent in the first round, his gas tank drastically plummets in the second round and in the rest of the fight. The Predator is known for his vicious knockout power. As soon as he arrived in the UFC, the heavy hitter bulldozed his way into quick knockout victories throughout a long list of heavyweights, including Andrei Arlovski, Alistair Overeem, Cain Velasquez, Curtis Blades, Junior Dos Santos, and Jairzinho Rozenstruik. But in his first title fight at UFC 220, longtime reigning champion Stipe Miocic exposed Ngannou's limited gas tank by landing several takedowns to eventually win by decision. At several points in the fight, Ngannou looked like he didn't want to continue fighting. But that wasn't the last time he displayed his horrible cardio. After his fight against Stipe, Derek Lewis tested the Cameroonian's gas tank again at UFC 226. Hardly anything happened throughout the entire fight, but at the end of the second round, Ngannou was seen breathing heavily. But despite Lewis winning that fight, he has a worse gas tank than the Predator. Number 7. Derek Lewis. Despite being the only fighter to have tested Ngannou's tank other than Stipe Miocic, Derek Lewis has issues with his gas tank, usually coming in at the weight limit at 265 pounds. The Black Beast, unlike Ngannou, has so much fat on him that he finds movement difficult after some minutes in the cage. Well, just like the Predator, he makes up for it by being one of the hardest hitters in UFC history. Boasting the most knockouts in UFC heavyweight history, the Black Beast immediately goes for the kill, and when he fails to finish the fight, his win potentially goes down significantly. Among several embarrassing performances, it was Lewis's loss to Mark Hunt that exposed his weak conditioning. Again in the interim title fight against Cyril Gane, Lewis literally gave up due to exhaustion, thus placing him at number 7 on the list of the worst gas tanks ever seen in the UFC. Number 6. Rodolfo Vieira. BJJ legend Rodolfo Vieira is a master at grappling, but not so good at managing his gas tank in MMA. In BJJ competitions, he was known for his fast-paced guard passing style and great cardio, but his show against Anthony Hernandez at UFC 258 really puts his poor gas tank on display. Early in round 1, Vieira looked fantastic as he swiftly took down and mounted his opponent. With both men not yet slippery from sweat, the BJJ ace worked for submission after submission. Well, smart enough, Hernandez was patient and avoided the BJJ black belt's effort before eventually getting backed up on his feet. Once backed up on the feet, Vieira was gassed from the submission attempts. His punches were few and far between, and when he threw, it was labored. His opponent, realizing this, capitalized on the opportunity and ravaged Vieira on the feet. Being a warrior, Vieira used every bit of gas tank to survive to see round 2, but even then, he didn't last long. Following an onslaught of more significant strikes on the feet, the fight hit the canvas, but this time, it was his turn to defend. Hernandez quickly worked on an anaconda choke, but flipped it to an arm-in guillotine, bloodying and suffocating Vieira until he tapped. Number 5. Edmen Shahbazyan. Perhaps Anthony Hernandez has a thing for exposing guys with bad cardio endurance. But to be fair, Edmen's gas tank has always been a topic ever since he lost to Derek Brunson and went on a 4-fight losing streak. Hernandez only just solidified fans' opinions of Edmen's horrible cardio endurance. But before stringing the losses, Shahbazyan was championship material, and everyone expected him to be the next GOAT of the middleweight division. While Edmen possesses the skills, technique, and power, what he lacked was a gas tank. Out of his 12 wins as a pro, he finished 10 out of them in the first round, With solid KO power and sleek submissions, he finished his fights really early, and when he failed to finish fights, his gas tank got exposed. His losses to Brunson, Imov, and Hernandez are proof. While still being one of the younger fighters in the division, Shabazian could take the Charles Oliveira route to being a dominant force in the future. Number 4. Shane Carwin. In every first round, Shane Carwin has the best heavyweight round. But after the first round, he fought like an uncle fighting over the last pint of beer. But among all his performances, the one which really revealed his horrible gas tank was his biggest fight ever, a clash with then heavyweight champion Brock Lesnar at UFC 116. In the first 5 minutes of the fight, Carwin looked dangerous as he heaped up on ground and pound, almost getting Lesnar out of there. Somehow, however, Lesnar survived the round, and in the second round, Carwin was gasping for air and his arms were burnt out from all the punching he'd done. He quickly conceded a takedown and tapped to an arm triangle choke. Number 3. Zabit Magomed Sharipov. Retired featherweight fighter Zabit Magomed Sharipov has won every one of his fights in the UFC, but among fans, he is reputable for having a bad gas tank. Since he lacked power, Zabit expended a lot of energy pushing himself harder trying to finish the fight. But really, that was not the reason for his ridiculous gas tank. According to the fighter, he has a medical condition of diaphragm spasms, which could cause a fighter to breathe with difficulty, thus having a huge impact on his cardio. Given this condition, the Dagestani fighter was never fighting at his best. After his fight against Calvin Kattar, it became obvious to him what the issue was, and recounting the incident he said, "I got a little tired in the third round because I got an infection when I was in Thailand. I had to take antibiotics, so I think that influenced my performance." Despite these conditions, the Dagestani fighter has managed to have only one loss in his professional MMA career and has remained undefeated in the UFC with a clean 6-0 record. Earlier in May 2021, Russian journalist Igor Lazorin made an Instagram post saying that Zabit had decided to undergo surgery. As it is, Zabit is stone tired of fighting and has no special motivation to get back in there and compete. He retired in 2022, turning his attention to medicine. Number 2. Kevin Lee. Another fighter who suffered from having a bad gas tank due to an infection was UFC star Kevin Lee. From bad weight cuts to packing too much muscle mass, Lee found it difficult to fight at a high pace for multiple rounds. But really, the reason he's on this list is because of his fight against Tony Ferguson, throughout which he flexed a staph infection on his chest. The Motown phenom thoroughly outstruck El Cucuy in the first round and scored a takedown from which he had 2 minutes of control time. As usual, he looked fierce as his punches were heavy and his ground and pound was filled with intent. In that round, it seemed as though Ferguson had no answer for Lee's strength and grappling. But as the fight went on, Lee tired out and his output dropped. By the third round, he had nothing left in the tank and succumbed to a triangle choke that sparked his downward spiral. Well, according to the fighter, it was a staph infection that affected his cardio largely. But really, that is not the first time Kevin Lee gassed out in a fight. Number 1. Conor McGregor. Coming at number 1 is none other than the greatest superstar in MMA history. Apparently, having a great gas tank does not translate to being famous, nor does it mean you'd be a great fighter. I mean, Conor went on to become a 2-division champion, even with a ridiculously poor gas tank. Well, like many fighters on the list, he mastered the art of finishing early, as he boasts 16 finishes in the first round. But anytime Conor faced any slight difficulty in the beginning, his gas tank plummeted and his performance reduced drastically. In both fights with cardio monster Nate Diaz, at UFC 196 and UFC 202, Conor was visibly tired of facing Diaz's pressure and was even seen taking laps around the octagon. Again, in his professional boxing debut against another cardio monster Floyd Mayweather, the legendary boxer took full advantage of Conor's weakness by pulling the fight into the later rounds. In the end, the fight was stopped because the Irishman was too tired to raise his hands to defend Mayweather's punches. Also, his infamous loss to Khabib Nurmagomedov at UFC 229 saw the Russian capitalize on the Irishman's cardio limitations. Conor could also be seen gassing out quickly in his fight against Dustin Poirier. But if you wouldn't want to run out of top MMA news and content, then subscribe to this channel. Don't forget to comment and like.